He was sitting in seat 1A, minding his own business. They thought he was a trespasser. They thought he was a nobody. They were wrong. Dead wrong. In the high-stakes world of aviation, one mistake can cost you a ticket. But dragging this man off the plane didn't just cost the airline their reputation. It cost them their existence. This is the story of Tobias King, the man who didn't scream, didn't fight, but made one single phone call that turned $1 billion airline into a ghost town in 60 seconds flat. Buckle up. The turbulence you're about to experience isn't from the weather. It's from the karma. The recycled air inside the cabin of Vista Blue Airlines Flight 402 smelled faintly of sanitized leather and expensive coffee. It was the smell of exclusivity. First class on this transatlantic route from JFK to London Heathrow was less about transportation and more about a declaration of status. Tobias King adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones over his ears, drowning out the murmurs of the boarding passengers shuffling past him toward the economy section. He pulled the hood of his charcoal grey oversized sweatshirt further over his eyes. To the untrained eye, Tobias looked like he belonged anywhere but Seat 1A. He was wearing faded sweatpants, scuffed sneakers that had seen better days, and a hoodie that looked like it had been through the wash 100 times. He was exhausted. 72 hours of non-stop negotiations in New York had drained him. The merger was done. The ink was dry. He just wanted to sleep. He didn't want champagne. He didn't want the hot towel service. He wanted silence. "Excuse me, sir?" Tobias didn't move. He had the volume on his jazz playlist turned up, just enough to signal, "Do not disturb." "Sir?" The voice was sharper this time, a tap on his shoulder. Tobias sighed, sliding the headphones down to his neck. He looked up. Standing over him was a flight attendant, with a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her name tag read, Patricia. She had the kind of posture that suggested she measured her self-worth by how strictly she could enforce rules that didn't exist. "Yes?" Tobias asked, his voice low and raspy from lack of sleep. "I need to see your boarding pass again," Patricia said. It wasn't a request. Her eyes flicked over his hoodie, then down to his sneakers, and finally to the frayed duffel bag he had shoved under the seat in front of him. Her expression was one of poorly concealed disgust. Tobias blinked slowly. "I scanned it at the gate. I showed it to the attendant at the door. Yes, well, we've had some discrepancies with the manifest," Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. "And we need to verify that everyone is in their assigned cabin." She emphasized the word assigned, as if the concept were foreign to him. Tobias reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and unlocked the screen. He pulled up the digital pass. Tobias King, Seat 1A, Group 1. He held it up. Patricia squinted at the screen, not touching the phone, as if it might be contagious. She stared at it for a long 5 seconds, far longer than necessary to read a name and a number. "Is there a problem?" Tobias asked. "The screen is cracked," she noted, sniffing. "It's hard to read. Are you sure this is a current ticket? Not a screenshot from a previous flight?" Tobias let out a dry chuckle. "It's got today's date, Patricia. Flight 402. Right there." She straightened up, smoothing her uniform. "Fine. But keep it accessible. We might need to check again." She didn't apologize. She didn't offer him a pre-flight drink. She simply turned on her heel and marched toward the galley, whispering something to her colleague while gesturing vaguely in Tobias's direction. Tobias shook his head, sliding his headphones back on. He was used to this. It didn't matter that his bank account could buy this entire fuselage 3 times over. It didn't matter that he was the silent majority shareholder of the logistics firm that supplied Vista Blue's in-flight meals. To Patricia, He was just a guy in a hoodie who had likely slipped past the gate agent. He closed his eyes, leaning back into the plush leather. Just let me sleep, he thought. Just 8 hours of sleep. But the universe, and specifically a man named Grant, had other plans. 10 minutes later, the peace was shattered again. I'm sorry. I think there's been a mistake. The voice was loud, booming, and carried the specific cadence of a man who had never been told no in his life. Tobias felt the vibration of someone standing right next to his seat. He opened one eye. Standing in the aisle was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built Wall Street stereotypes. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that cost more than most cars. A Patek Philippe watch glinted under the cabin lights. His hair was gelled back with military precision. This was Grant. Behind Grant stood Patricia, looking flustered, but eager to please. "Sir," Grant said, looking directly at Tobias. "You're in my seat." Tobias took off his headphones again. "I don't think so." "One eye," Grant said, pointing a manicured finger at the overhead sign. "I always sit in 1A. I'm a Platinum Elite member with Vista Blue. I book 1A. "Well, you must have booked it late," Tobias said calmly. "Because I'm sitting in it." Grant laughed. It was a cold, incredulous sound. He turned to Patricia. "Patricia, is it? Look, I don't know how this mix-up happened, but I think this gentleman is confused. I need my seat. I have a meeting in London as soon as we land, and I need the extra legroom to work." Patricia stepped forward, her demeanor completely different from when she had addressed Tobias. She was practically beaming at Grant. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, reading his tag on his carry-on. "I am so sorry for the inconvenience. Let me check the system." She pulled out a tablet and tapped furiously. Tobias watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. He knew exactly what was happening. Vista Blue had an infamous reputation for overbooking, and their priority algorithm often booted paying customers for higher-tier loyalty members if the flight was full. "It says here seat 1A is assigned to a Mr. King," Patricia said, frowning at her tablet. "That's me," Tobias said. "Tobias King." Grant waved a hand dismissively. "That's impossible. My assistant booked this ticket 3 days ago. Check again. There must be a glitch. Look at him." Grant didn't whisper. He gestured openly at Tobias's sweatpants. "Does it look like he paid full fare for first class? He probably used miles or got some lucky upgrade at the gate. I paid cash." "Full fare." Patricia bit her lip, looking between the two men. On one side, a man in a bespoke suit with a platinum tag on his bag, radiating wealth and authority. On the other, a tired black man in a hoodie with a cracked phone screen. The bias took exactly 3 seconds to settle in her mind. "Mr. King," Patricia said, her voice turning icy again, "I'm going to have to ask you to verify your ticket one more time." "I already showed you," Tobias said, his patience thinning. "There seems to be a conflict in the system," Patricia lied. She wasn't looking at the tablet anymore. She was looking at Grant, reassuring him with a nod. "I need to see your physical boarding pass. The mobile one might be glitched." "I don't have a physical pass. I use the app, like everyone else in this century," Tobias said. "Sir, if you cannot produce a valid ticket that matches our priority manifest, I have to ask you to move," Patricia said. "Move where?" Tobias asked. "The flight is full, isn't it?" "We have a seat available in Economy Plus," Patricia said. "Row 24, it has extra legroom." Grant smirked. "There you go. Row 24, you'll be fine there, buddy." Tobias sat up straighter. The fatigue was vanishing, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I paid for this seat. I selected this seat. I am not moving to row 24. "Sir, please don't make a scene," Patricia snapped. "Mr. Maxwell is a platinum member. I don't care if he's the Pope." Tobias interrupted, his voice steady, but carrying a weight that made the passengers in 1B and 2A look up. "I bought the ticket. It's my seat. End of story." Grant sighed, checking his watch ostentatiously. "Patricia, call the captain or security. I'm not standing here all day while you argue with a squatter." "I'm not a squatter," Tobias said, his eyes narrowing. "You're in my seat and you're dressed like you're going to the gym," Grant scoffed. "Do the math." Patricia made a decision. She tapped her earpiece. "Captain, we have a disruptive passenger in first class, refusing to vacate a seat for a priority boarding member. Yes, we might need assistance." She looked down at Tobias with a smug expression. "You have one last chance to move to row 24 voluntarily, Mr. King, before this gets embarrassing for you." Tobias looked at her. He looked at Grant. He looked at the other passengers, some of whom were now pulling out their phones to record. "It's not going to be embarrassing for me, Patricia," Tobias said softly. The captain didn't come out. Instead, 2 airport police officers boarded the plane. They were large men, clearly tired of dealing with unruly drunks and seat disputes. They saw the scene. A well-dressed man standing indignantly in the aisle, a flight attendant pointing an accusatory finger, and a man in a hoodie sitting calmly in 1A. They naturally gravitated toward Patricia. "What's the problem?" Officer Miller asked. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions," Patricia said, her voice rising an octave to sound more victimized. "He is in the wrong seat. He is refusing to verify his ticket, and he is becoming aggressive." Tobias remained seated, his horns visible on his lap. "I am not aggressive. I have a ticket. They want to give my seat to him because he has a platinum card." Officer Miller looked at Tobias. "Sir, if the flight crew asks you to move, you have to move. It's federal aviation policy. You can sort out the refund later." "I'm not moving," Tobias stated. "I have rights as a consumer. I hold a valid contract for this seat." "Sir, I'm ordering you to get up," the second officer, Officer Davis, said, stepping into the narrow space. "And if I don't, then we will remove you." Grant chuckled from the galley. "Go on, officer. Get him out of here so we can take off." Tobias looked at the officers. "If you put your hands on me, you are making a mistake. A very expensive mistake." "Is that a threat?" Miller asked, his hand dropping to his belt. "It's a fact," Tobias said. Miller didn't like that. He lunged forward, grabbing Tobias by the arm. "All right, let's go." "Don't touch me!" Tobias shouted, finally raising his voice. He tried to pull his arm back, but the confined space made it impossible to maneuver. Officer Davis grabbed his other arm. They weren't gentle. They yanked him upward. Tobias's leg caught on the armrest, and he stumbled. Instead of helping him regain his balance, Miller shoved him toward the aisle. Tobias hit the opposite seat hard, his shoulder slamming into the plastic casing. "Stop, you're hurting him!" A woman in row 2 screamed. She was filming with her iPhone. "He didn't do anything." "Back up, Mom," Patricia yelled at the passenger. "This is a security matter." The officers didn't stop. They grabbed Tobias by the back of his hoodie and his belt, effectively dragging him down the aisle of first class. His sneakers squeaked against the floor. His duffel bag was kicked aside by Grant, who stepped over it to finally claim seat 1A. "Unbelievable," Grant muttered as he sat down, brushing lint off his suit. Finally. Tobias didn't fight back physically. He knew better. He knew that if he threw a punch, he would lose the moral high ground, and likely his freedom. So he let them drag him. He let them humiliate him. They hauled him through the curtain, past the horrified faces of the economy passengers. He was dragged past row 10, row 20, row 30, all the way to the front jet bridge exit. They pushed him out onto the metal gangway, where the cool air hit his face. You're lucky we don't arrest you for trespassing, Miller spat, breathing heavily. You're banned from Vista Blue. Go find a bus. They tossed his duffel bag out after him. It skidded across the floor, the zipper bursting open. A few clothes spilled out. Tobias stood up, slowly. He dusted off his sweatpants. He checked his shoulder. It was throbbing, likely bruised. He picked up his phone, which had fallen on the floor during the scuffle. The screen was more cracked than before, but it still worked. He looked back at the plane. The door was being closed. He could see Patricia through the porthole window, laughing as she handed Grant a glass of champagne. Tobias didn't yell. He didn't bang on the door. He simply unlocked his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call the police. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a number saved simply as Richard, CEO Vista Blue, personal. But he didn't call Richard. Not yet. He called Julianne, his chief financial officer at Kingston & Co. Hello? Julianne answered on the first ring. Tobias? I thought you were in the air. I was, Tobias said, his voice deadly calm. Change of plans, Julianne. Listen to me very carefully. What's wrong? You know that Bridge Loan Vista Blue Airlines is trying to secure from us the $400 million liquidity injection to keep their fleet insurance valid for the next quarter? Yes, Julianne said. We're scheduled to sign the final authorization in 2 hours. It's practically a done deal. Their stock is rallying on the rumor. Tobias watched the jet bridge retract from the plane. Flight 402 was preparing for pushback. Kill it, Tobias said. Excuse me? Kill the deal. Withdraw the offer. Immediately. And Julianne? Yes, Tobias. Call the underwriter for their current fleet insurance, the one we own the majority stake in. Tell them we are invoking the material adverse change clause due to operational instability. Tobias, if we do that, their insurance lapses. If their insurance lapses, the FAA grounds their entire fleet, every single plane, worldwide, in real time. I know, Tobias said, watching the plane begin to move. Do it. Now. On it. The line went dead. Tobias looked at his watch. Wire dos oro. The clock started now. He picked up his bag and walked back into the terminal. He found a seat near the window where he could watch Flight 402 taxiing toward the runway. He sat down, crossed his legs, and waited. He gave it 60 seconds. Inside the cockpit of Flight 402, Captain Reynolds was going through the standard pre-flight checklist. The giant Airbus A330 was a beast of engineering, a symphony of avionics and hydraulics. He nudged the throttle forward, feeling the massive Rolls-Royce engines hum to life as the tug disconnected. Tower, Vista Blue 402, requesting taxi to runway 4 left. Reynolds spoke into his headset. Vista Blue 402, taxi via Kilo. Hold short of 4 left, the controller replied. Reynolds released the parking brake. The plane lurched forward. In the cabin, the fasten seatbelt sign dinged. In seat 1A, Grant Maxwell was settling in. He had reclined the seat slightly, just enough to be comfortable but upright enough to look busy. He sipped the champagne Patricia had brought him, a vintage Dom Perignon that wasn't usually opened until cruising altitude, but Patricia was eager to apologize for the rift raft disturbance. So sorry about that again, Mr. Maxwell, Patricia purred, leaning over to refill his glass before they even hit the runway. We take the exclusivity of our first-class cabin very seriously. It's fine, Patricia, Grant said, waving a hand magnanimously. Just glad you got the trash out. Honestly, how do people like that even get through security? Hoodies in the priority lane. It's a bad look for the brand. Agreed entirely, she nodded. The plane turned onto the taxiway. The engines whined, ready to unleash their power. And then silence. Not the silence of the cabin, but the silence of the thrust. The engines spooled down rapidly. The plane's momentum slowed until it came to a shuddering halt in the middle of the tarmac, miles away from the gate but nowhere near the runway. Grant frowned. The champagne sloshed in his glass. What now? Up in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was staring at the ACARS screen, the digital text messaging system used by pilots and dispatchers. A message had just flashed across the display in bright red letters, accompanied by a triple chime master caution alarm. Priority, message, company command, status, critical, order, stop immediate, do not take off. Reason, fleet insurance invalidated, certificate revoked. Reynolds blinked. He looked at his first officer, who was staring at his own screen, pale as a sheet. Insurance invalidated, the first officer whispered. Captain, if we don't have insurance, we are illegal. We can't move. I know, Reynolds snapped. He keyed the radio. Tower, Vista Blue 402. We have a company situation. We are stopping on the taxiway. 402, say again. You are blocking the active taxiway for Delta and American behind you. The tower controller sounded irritated. We cannot move, Tower. We have been ordered to cut engines. We are dead stick. Back in the cabin, the lights flickered and switched to emergency power as the main engines were shut down to conserve the auxiliary power unit. The hum of the air conditioning died, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Reynolds's voice came over the PA system, sounding shaken. This is the captain. We have received an urgent order from our corporate headquarters to halt the aircraft immediately. We are experiencing a critical administrative failure regarding the aircraft's operating status. We are waiting for further instructions. Please remain seated. Grant huffed, slamming his glass down on the tray table. Unbelievable. Administrative failure? What is this? A budget airline? He looked out the window. He could see other planes maneuvering around them, taking off, soaring into the sky. But Flight 402 sat there like a beached whale. Grant didn't know it yet. But it wasn't just Flight 402. At Heathrow in London, a Vista Blue flight preparing to board was stopped at the gate. In Los Angeles, a flight that had just pushed back was towed back in. In Tokyo, a Vista Blue cargo freighter was denied entry into airspace and ordered to turn around. In exactly 60 seconds, the entire global fleet of Vista Blue Airlines, 142 aircraft, carrying over 30,000 passengers, had been paralyzed. The skies were closing to them, and in the terminal, sitting on a hard plastic chair near a pretzel stand, Tobias King watched the Flight 402 status on the departure board flick from on time to delayed. He took a bite of a cinnamon pretzel. He waited for the next flip. 10 seconds later, the board flickered again. Delayed changed to cancelled. Tobias wiped sugar off his fingers. Karma, he whispered to no one, is a dish best served instantly. The headquarters of Vista Blue Airlines in Chicago was usually a place of controlled chaos. Today, it was a slaughterhouse. Richard Halloway, the CEO of Vista Blue, was in the middle of a putting practice in his corner office when his secretary burst in without knocking. She didn't look apologetic. She looked terrified. Mr. Halloway, Ops is screaming. The FAA just issued a grounding order. Richard dropped his putter. A what? For which plane? For all of them, she said, her voice trembling. Every single one. The global insurance underwriter sent a cease and desist at 9:02 a.m. They said our liquidity coverage for the liability policy was withdrawn. Withdrawn? Richard's face went purple. That's impossible. We have the bridge loan from Kingston and Kirby's signing today. That covers the liquidity gap. It's a formality. He ran to his desk, grabbing the phone. He dialed the direct line for the head of the underwriting firm. This is Halloway. What the hell is going on? You can't ground a fleet like this. The voice on the other end was cold, detached, and sounded very much like a lawyer reading a script. Mr. Halloway, at 9:01 a.m. we received notification from your primary financier, Kingston & Co., that they are exercising the Material Adverse Change Clause. They have pulled the funding offer. Without that capital guarantee, your risk profile exceeds our threshold. Your policy is void effective immediately. Richard felt the blood drain from his legs. He sat down hard. Kingston pulled the plug? Why? I spoke to them yesterday. The deal was done. You'll have to ask them, the underwriter said. Good luck, Richard. The line went dead. Richard's hands were shaking. He looked at his computer screen. The stock ticker for Vista Blue, VBLU, was nosediving. It had already halted trading due to volatility. In 5 minutes, the company had lost 40% of its value. Bankruptcy wasn't a possibility. At this rate, it was a certainty by lunch. Get me Tobias King, Richard barked at his secretary. Get him on the phone now. I can't, she stammered. What do you mean you can't? He's the managing partner. Call his office. I did, she said, holding up a tablet. His executive assistant said Mr. King is currently unavailable because he is traveling. She said he was flying on our airline. Richard froze. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. He's on a Vista Blue flight? Which one? Flight 402, JFK to London. He was coming to meet the European partners. Richard typed furiously into his keyboard, accessing the VIP manifest system. He found Flight 402. King, Tobias. Seat 1A. But the status didn't say on board. The status code next to his name was red. Invol denied boarding. Removed by crew. Security risk. Richard stared at the words. He read them once. He read them twice. The room seemed to spin. Removed, Richard whispered. We kicked him off? He clicked the incident report filed by the gate agent. The notes were brief and brutal. Passenger involved in seat dispute with Platinum member Mr. Maxwell. Passenger refused to vacate seat 1A. Passenger lacked proper attire and physical boarding pass. Police removed passenger at 08:55 a.m. Richard looked at the time on his wall clock. The funding was pulled at 09:00 a.m., 5 minutes after Tobias King was dragged off the plane. Oh my God, Richard gasped, clutching his chest. We didn't just kick a passenger off. We kicked off the bank. He grabbed his cell phone. He had Tobias's personal number. He had never used it, saving it only for extreme emergencies. This qualified. Back at JFK Terminal 4, the scene was apocalyptic. The ground stop meant that every Vista Blue plane at the terminal had to deplane. Thousands of passengers were flooding back into the gate areas. Angry shouting matches were breaking out at every counter. Why is it cancelled? I have a wedding. My luggage is on that plane. In the middle of the riot, Tobias sat calmly. He was charging his phone at a kiosk. He watched the chaos with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a reaction he had engineered. His phone buzzed. Richard Halloway. Tobias let it ring. He took a sip of water. It rang again. And again. On the fourth attempt, Tobias swiped the screen. Hello? Tobias! Tobias, it's Richard. Richard Halloway. The voice was frantic, breathless. Who? Tobias asked, his voice flat. Richard, the CEO of Vista Blue. Tobias, please, tell me this is a misunderstanding. The financing, it's gone. The fleet is grounded. We're bleeding out. I know, Tobias said. I'm watching the stock price right now. Looks like a sell to me. Tobias, why? We had a deal. Why did you pull the plug? I didn't think the airline was a secure investment anymore, Tobias said, leaning back in the plastic chair. I experienced some operational inefficiencies this morning. It made me question the leadership culture. Operational inefficiencies? Richard screeched. Tobias, please. What happened? We can fix it. Whatever it is, I'll fire the person responsible. Just tell me what happened. Well, Richard, Tobias said, watching the gate for Flight 402, where the jet bridge was being reattached to the stranded plane. It seems your staff has a policy of prioritizing status over contracts. I had a valid contract for Seat 1A. Your staff decided that a man named Grant Maxwell and his suit were more important than that contract. They had me assaulted and dragged off the plane by the police. There was a silence on the other end so profound it felt like the phone line had been cut. You, Richard choked. They dragged you off? They did. Because I was wearing a hoodie, Richard. And apparently your platinum members don't like sitting near people who wear hoodies. Oh, God, Richard moaned. Tobias, I will kill them. I will personally fly there and kill them. Please, turn the money back on. We will lose the company in an hour. The company is already lost, Richard, Tobias said coldly. But the assets, the planes, the slots at Heathrow, those still have value. What are you saying? I'm saying that Kingston & Co. isn't interested in a loan anymore. We're interested in an acquisition, hostile, distressed asset pricing. You want to buy us? For pennies? I want to buy you for nothing, Richard. I'm going to buy the debt, foreclose on the fleet, and restart the airline under new management. My management. You can't do that. I can, and I will, unless what? Anything. Name it. Unless you get me my seat back, Tobias said, and you ensure that everyone on that plane knows exactly why they are sitting on the tarmac. The cabin of Flight 402 had transformed from a sanctuary of luxury into a stifling, pressurized tube. Without the engines running, the environmental control system had shut down 20 minutes ago. The air was growing heavy, thick with the scent of recycled coffee and rising panic. The mid-morning sun hammered against the fuselage, turning the first-class cabin into a greenhouse. Grant Maxwell loosened his silk tie, his face slick with a sheen of sweat that ruined the matte finish of his expensive moisturizer. He fanned himself with the safety instruction card, his leg bouncing nervously. This is completely unacceptable, Grant barked, his voice cutting through the nervous murmurs of the other passengers. He jabbed the call button again, though the chime had long since stopped working. Patricia, where is the captain? I demand an update. If I miss my connection to the Dubai conference, I'm suing this entire airline for loss of income. Patricia, the flight attendant who had been so smug only an hour ago, was now cowering in the galley. She was frantically texting on her personal phone, her hands shaking. The rumors had already started to bleed through the crew's WhatsApp groups. Bankruptcy, insolvency, fleet grounded. Mr. Maxwell, please, Patricia said, her voice thin and brittle. We are doing everything we can. The pilots are. They are communicating with HQ. HQ is clearly incompetent, Grant snapped, standing up. He looked around the cabin, seeking allies among the other wealthy passengers. Can you believe this? We pay 5 figures for a seat, and they trap us here like cattle? It's kidnapping, that's what it is. A woman in seat 2B, a venture capitalist named Diane, looked up from her phone. Her face was pale. It's not incompetence, you idiot. Have you seen the news? Grant scoffed. I don't check the news, I make it. What are you talking about? Vista Blue stock just hit 0, she whispered, holding up her screen. Trading is halted. The company's credit rating was just downgraded to junk status. We aren't moving because the airline doesn't exist anymore. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. Grant blinked. That's impossible. I have a platinum status. They can't just go bankrupt while I'm on the plane. Before he could process the absurdity of his own statement, the plane lurched. A collective gasp ran through the cabin, as the aircraft shuddered. They weren't moving forward. They were being pushed back. The tug had engaged. Finally, Grant exhaled, buttoning his suit jacket. "They're taking us back to the gate. I'm getting on British Airways. Patricia, get my coat." The aircraft docked at the jet bridge with a heavy metallic clank. The seatbelt sign flickered off, but the main cabin door didn't open immediately. There was a pause, a long, agonizing minute, where the only sound was the heavy breathing of anxious passengers. Then, the door hissed open. It wasn't the ground crew coming to apologize. Stepping onto the plane was a woman who looked like she was walking to her own execution. Her name was Linda, the senior station manager for JFK. Her face was streaked with mascara tears that she hadn't bothered to wipe away. Flanking her were not the airport beat cops from earlier, but two high-ranking Port Authority police supervisors and a man in a dark suit who looked like a federal marshal. Grant stepped into the aisle, grabbing his carry-on. "About time. I want a refund processed immediately, and I want a transfer to—" "Sit down!" The voice didn't come from Linda. It came from the marshal. It was a voice that allowed no argument. It cracked like a whip in the small space. Grant froze, his mouth hanging open. "Excuse me? I am a priority passenger. You are currently a suspect in a federal investigation regarding the interference of flight operations," the marshal said, stepping forward. "Sit. Down. Now." Grant collapsed back into seat 1A, more out of shock than obedience. Linda picked up the interphone. Her hand trembled so violently she had to use her other hand to steady it. She didn't look at the passengers. She looked at the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice quivered over the PA system, cracking with emotion. I have been instructed to make a statement. As of 9:05 a.m. this morning, Vista Blue Airlines has lost its operating license due to a sudden withdrawal of liquidity insurance. She took a ragged breath. "This flight is cancelled. All flights are cancelled. The airline is ceasing operations." A roar of confusion erupted from the back of the plane, but in first class, the silence held. They were watching Linda. She had turned her eyes toward the galley, toward Patricia. "Patricia," Linda said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent cabin. "Pack your bag." Patricia blinked, clutching a coffee pot like a lifeline. "What? Linda, what's happening? Is it a strike?" "You're fired, Patricia," Linda said, tears finally spilling over again. "You, the gate agent, the check-in supervisor, all of you. Terminated for cause, effective immediately." "For cause?" Patricia shrieked, her facade crumbling. "I followed protocol. I prioritized the high-value customer. I got the squatter off the plane." "You didn't get a squatter off the plane," Linda sobbed. "You dragged the bank off the plane." The words hung in the air. "You dragged the bank off the plane." Grant frowned, leaning forward. "What does that mean? The guy in the hoodie?" Linda turned on him, her eyes blazing with a sudden, fierce anger. "That guy in the hoodie was Tobias King. He is the majority shareholder of Kingston & Co. He is the man who signs the checks that pay for the fuel, the insurance, and the lease on this aircraft. And because you treated him like garbage, he pulled the funding." She gestured wildly around the cabin. "It's gone, all of it. The jobs of 45,000 employees. Gone. Because you didn't like his sweatshirt." The realization hit the cabin like a physical blow. The other passengers turned to look at Grant. The admiration they had felt for his suit earlier had evaporated, replaced by a pure distillation of loathing. "You destroyed the airline?" Diane from 2B asked, her voice rising. "My portfolio is down 8% because you wanted extra legroom?" "No, that's a lie," Grant stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "He didn't say who he was. He had a cracked phone. He looked poor." "He's a billionaire, you moron," a man in row 3 shouted. "He doesn't have to impress you." "I didn't know," Grant yelled, standing up again, panic setting in. "Officer, tell them. I'm the victim here. He was in my seat." "Actually," a deep, calm voice came from the front of the plane. "It was never your seat, Grant." The crowd at the door parted. The police officers stepped aside, lowering their heads in deference. Tobias King walked back onto the aircraft. He hadn't changed clothes. He was still wearing the charcoal grey hoodie, the faded sweatpants, and the scuffed sneakers. He was still carrying the frayed duffel bag that Grant had kicked earlier, but the atmosphere around him had shifted tectonically. Before, he had looked like a tired traveler. Now, he looked like a titan. He radiated a cold, absolute power that made the air in the cabin feel 10 degrees colder. He walked slowly down the aisle, his footsteps soft on the carpet. He stopped at row 1. He looked at Patricia. Patricia was trembling so hard her teeth were chattering. She looked at Tobias, then at his hoodie, and she realized the enormity of her mistake. She had judged a book by its cover, and the book had just closed on her career. "Mr. King," Patricia whispered. I didn't know." "Ignorance is not a defense, Patricia," Tobias said softly. "Cruelty requires intent. You enjoyed it. I saw your face when they dragged me. You smiled." Patricia burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. She grabbed her purse and ran past him, fleeing the plane, followed by the silent condemnation of her former colleagues. Tobias turned his attention to seat 1A. Grant Maxwell was sitting there, but he looked small. He looked like a child who had broken a priceless vase and was trying to hide the pieces behind his back. "Mr. Maxwell," Tobias said. "Look, King. Mr. King," Grant started, his voice cracking. He tried to summon his corporate bravado, but it failed him. "We got off on the wrong foot, clearly. I'm a businessman. You're a businessman. We can settle this. I can make a donation to your charity." Tobias tilted his head, studying Grant like a specimen in a jar. "You think this is about money?" "Everything is about money," Grant said, grasping for familiar ground. "Name your price. For the seat. For the inconvenience." Tobias laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Grant, I just burned a $400 million financing deal just to teach you a lesson. Do you really think you can write a check big enough to impress me?" Grant swallowed hard. "Then what do you want?" "I want my seat back," Tobias said. "Fine," Grant said, scrambling to unbuckle his seatbelt. "Take it. It's yours. I'll go to row 24. Like you said, I'll sit in economy." He stood up, grabbing his bag, trying to squeeze past Tobias. Tobias didn't move. He blocked the aisle. "Oh no," Tobias said. "You misunderstood. Row 24 is for customers of Vista Blue Airlines." "I am a customer. I have platinum status." "Not anymore," Tobias said. "I just bought the debt on this airline, Grant, which means I own the rights to refuse service, and I am banning you. Lifetime ban. On Vista Blue, and on every partner airline in our alliance." "You can't do that," Grant whispered. "I have a meeting in London. It's the merger of the decade. If I'm not there at 9 a.m. tomorrow, my firm loses the contract." "Then you better start swimming," Tobias said, "because you aren't flying." "This is illegal," Grant screamed, his composure finally shattering. "I have rights. Officer, arrest him. He's disrupting my travel." The police supervisor stepped forward. He wasn't holding handcuffs. He was holding a pair of heavy-duty zip ties. "Mr. Maxwell," the supervisor said, "we have reviewed the security footage from the gate. We have a signed affidavit from Mr. King and 3 other witnesses. You are under arrest." "Arrest?" Grant squeaked. "For what?" "Assault," the supervisor listed, ticking off fingers. "Theft of services, since you occupied a seat you didn't pay for, and federal interference with a flight crew resulting in the grounding of an aircraft. That last one is a felony, sir." Grant backed away, bumping into the bulkhead. No, you can't. "Do you know who I work for? Sterling and Oak Hill. I will have your badges." "Turn around, sir," the supervisor said, spinning Grant around and cinching the zip ties tight. The sound of the plastic locking was loud in the silent cabin. Grant was marched down the aisle. He wasn't dragged, he walked, but the humiliation was far worse. He passed the rows of passengers who were now holding up their phones, recording every second of his downfall. "I'll sue you," Grant yelled back at Tobias as he was shoved onto the jet bridge. "You haven't heard the last of this." Tobias didn't even turn around. He watched the empty jet bridge for a moment, then looked up at the overhead bin. His duffel bag was still there. He reached up, adjusted it slightly so the strap wasn't twisted, and then looked at the empty seat 1A. He turned to Linda, who was still standing by the cockpit door, looking like she was waiting for the world to end. "Linda?" Tobias asked. "Yes, Mr. King," she sniffled. "Are the pilots still on board?" "Yes, sir. They are filing the cancellation paperwork." "Tell them to stop," Tobias said. He sat down in seat 1A, sinking into the leather that had caused so much trouble. "Tell them to restart the engines. I've instructed my office to reinstate the insurance policy. The funds have been transferred. The fleet is active." Linda's jaw dropped. You're ungrounding the planes." "I am," Tobias said. He buckled his seatbelt. "We're going to London." But the crew," Linda stammered. "We fired the flight attendants." Tobias looked at the young woman standing in the aisle, the one from economy who had watched the whole thing with wide, terrified eyes. Her name tag read Sarah. "Sarah," Tobias said. Yes, sir? Do you know how to serve champagne?" I think so, sir." "Congratulations," Tobias said. "You're the new purser for first class. Double salary." "Can you handle the door?" Sarah stood up straighter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." "Good," Tobias said. He pulled his headphones out of his pocket. He slid them over his ears. He pulled his hood up, covering his eyes. "And Linda?" "Yes, Mr. King?" "Get me a ginger ale. No ice." The flight to London was the quietest 7 hours in the history of commercial aviation. Usually, a first-class cabin is a hub of soft murmurs, the clinking of silverware and the rustle of newspapers. On Vista Blue Flight 402, the silence was absolute. It was a heavy, reverent silence, the kind usually reserved for cathedrals or courtrooms before a verdict is read. Tobias King slept for 4 hours. He didn't sleep out of arrogance. He slept because he was genuinely exhausted. He had just bought an airline, fired a CEO, and restructured $1 billion of debt in the span of 20 minutes, all while wearing a hoodie that cost $30. When he woke up, a fresh glass of ginger ale was already waiting on his console. The condensation was perfectly wiped away. There was no ice, just as he had asked. A young flight attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, hovered nearby. She wasn't Patricia. Patricia had been escorted off the plane, along with Grant and the gate agents. Sarah had been pulled from economy to cover the first-class service. She looked terrified. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the napkin on his tray. Tobias took a sip of the ginger ale. He looked at her. "You don't have to be scared of me, Sarah," Tobias said, his voice low. I know, Mr. King," she stammered. "It's just, we heard what happened. We heard about the insurance, the fleet grounding." "That wasn't about punishing the staff," Tobias said, unbuckling his seatbelt to stretch. "That was about correcting a systemic failure. Do you know why I bought this airline, Sarah?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "Because a company is like a fish," Tobias said, looking out the window at the Atlantic Ocean below. "It rots from the head down. Patricia was rude, yes. The police were aggressive, yes. But they acted that way because the culture allowed it. They thought power looked like a suit and a platinum card. I had to remind them that power is actually the ability to change reality. And today, their reality changed." He smiled kindly. "You're doing a great job. Is there any of that cheesecake left?" Sarah let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since New York. "Yes, sir. I'll get it right away." While Tobias ate his cheesecake, the world below was catching fire. The passenger in row 2, a teenager named Chloe, had uploaded her video before the plane even took off. She had excellent 5G coverage at the gate. The video was titled, "Vista Blue Drags Guy in Hoodie. Turns out he owns the bank. Rush Karma. Vista Blue Arwash Tobias King." By the time Flight 402 began its descent into Heathrow, the video had 45 million views. It was on CNN. It was on the BBC. It was trending on Twitter above the Super Bowl. The image of Grant Maxwell looking smug as Tobias was dragged down the aisle had become the meme of the year. The internet detectives had already identified Grant. His LinkedIn profile was being bombarded with thousands of comments every minute. When the plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow, the view from the window was unusual. Usually, it was ground crew and baggage handlers. Today there was a sea of cameras. Tobias stood up. He grabbed his frayed duffel bag. "Mr. King?" Sarah asked. "Do you want us to hold the press back? We can request a private exit." Tobias pulled his hood up. "No, I have nothing to hide, but do me a favor. Anything. Make sure the rest of the passengers get a voucher for the delay. A real one. Cash, not miles." Tobias walked off the plane. The flashbulbs were blinding. Reporters were shouting questions over the barrier. "Mr. King! Mr. King! Is it true you bought the airline mid-flight? Mr. King, do you plan to fire the entire board? Tobias, what do you have to say to Grant Maxwell?" Tobias stopped for a brief moment. He looked at a reporter from Sky News. "I have nothing to say to Mr. Maxwell," Tobias said, his voice caught perfectly by the boom mics. "I think the universe has already spoken to him." He walked through the terminal, found his driver, and disappeared into the London rain. The boardroom bloodbath. 48 hours later, Tobias walked into the Vista Blue headquarters in Chicago. He wasn't wearing a hoodie this time. He was wearing a bespoke suit, sharper than anything Grant Maxwell had ever owned, but he wore it with an air of indifference. He walked into the boardroom. The entire C-suite was there. Richard Halloway sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Tobias," Richard said, standing up. We've prepared a turnaround strategy. We can fix the PR disaster. We can—" "Sit down, Richard," Tobias said gently. He didn't take a seat. He walked around the table, looking at the portraits of past CEOs on the wall. "You know," Tobias said to the room, "when I was dragged off that plane, I wasn't thinking about the bruise on my shoulder. I was thinking about the data." "The data?" the VP of Marketing asked. "The data of human value," Tobias said. "Your algorithm values passengers based on how much they paid for a ticket in the last 12 months. It calculates their worth to the penny. Grant Maxwell was worth $45,000 a year to this company, so you protected him." Tobias stopped behind Richard's chair. "But you failed to calculate the risk of ignoring the unknown variable. You assumed I was worth zero. That is a failure of imagination. And in business, a lack of imagination is fatal." Tobias dropped a folder on the table. "Richard, you're out. The board has already voted. Your golden parachute has been denied due to gross negligence." Richard slumped. He didn't argue. He knew it was over. The entire executive team is being placed on probation, Tobias continued. We are implementing a new policy. No more overbooking. No more bumping passengers for status. If a person buys a seat, it is their seat. I don't care if the President of the United States wants it. A contract is a contract. He looked at the terrified faces around the table. And one more thing. From now on, every executive at this table will fly economy once a month. In the middle seat. Wear a hoodie. See how you get treated. If you don't like it, fix it. The fall of Grant Maxwell. While Tobias was cleaning house in Chicago, Grant Maxwell was sitting in a small, glass-walled office in Canary Wharf, London. He wasn't in a meeting. He was facing his boss, the senior partner of the investment firm Sterling and Oak Hill. Grant, the partner said, sliding an iPad across the desk. Have you seen this? It was the video, the moment where Grant laughed and said, Go on, officer. Get him out of here so we can take off. It's out of context, Grant stammered. He was aggressive. He was trespassing. He was Tobias King, the partner shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. Do you know who our biggest client is, Grant? Do you know who manages the pension fund for half the unions we represent? Grant felt the blood leave his face. Kingston & Co.? Kingston & Co., the partner confirmed. Tobias King sent me an email this morning. It was very short. It said he is reviewing his relationships with firms that employ high-risk individuals. He specifically named you. I can apologize, Grant said. I'll send a letter. It's too late for letters, the partner said. We lost the Kensington deal this morning because the client doesn't want to be associated with the guy from the plane video. You're radioactive, Grant. You can't fire me, Grant whispered. I brought in millions. And you cost us billions in reputation, the partner said. Pack your desk. Security will escort you out. And Grant? Yes? Don't ask for a reference. Grant walked out of the building with a cardboard box. It was raining. He tried to hail a cab, but they drove past him. He tried to call an Uber, but his rating had plummeted. He stood on the curb, his expensive suit soaking wet, and for the first time in his life, he felt small. He felt invisible. He looked just like a guy in wet clothes who didn't belong. 1 year later, Vista Blue Airlines was no longer a punchline. It was the highest-rated airline in North America. The King Doctrine, as business schools called it, had revolutionized customer service. The stock price had tripled. Tobias King was at JFK Airport again. He was wearing a hoodie. He was wearing sneakers. He walked up to the gate for a flight to Tokyo. The gate agent was a new hire, a young man named David. Boarding pass, please, David asked with a smile. Tobias held up his phone. The screen was fixed now. David scanned it. The machine beeped. Mr. King, David said, his eyes lighting up as he recognized the name. Welcome back. Seat 1A. Actually, Tobias said, looking at the crowded gate area. He saw a young mother struggling with a baby and a toddler. She looked exhausted. She was holding a boarding pass for row 34. David, is the flight full? Completely, sir. Swap me, Tobias said. Sir? Give seat 1A to her. Tobias gestured to the mother. Put me in 34B. Mr. King, you own the airline. You don't have to sit in the middle seat. Tobias smiled. He pulled his hood up. I know I don't have to, David. That's exactly why I should. Tobias took the new boarding pass. He walked over to the mother, handed her the first-class ticket, and took her economy pass before she could even protest. He walked down the jet bridge, whistling a jazz tune. He found his seat in row 34, squeezed in between two teenagers who were watching a movie on an iPad. Excuse me, Tobias said, sliding in. Watch it, dude, one of the kids said, not looking up. You're bumping my elbow. Tobias chuckled. He leaned back against the thin seat, closed his eyes, and smiled. He was just a passenger, and that was all he ever wanted to be. And that, my friends, is how you serve a cold dish of karma at 30,000 feet. Grant Maxwell learned the hard way that a cheap suit doesn't make you poor, and an expensive one doesn't make you important. Tobias King didn't just buy an airline. He bought a lesson for the entire world. The person you step on today might be the one you need to save you tomorrow. Never judge a book by its cover, and definitely never judge a man by his hoodie. What would you have done if you were Tobias? Would you have bought the airline, or would you have just sued them for millions? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. Until next time, stay humble and safe travels.